Good evening to you all from Bangalore. At the outset, let me thank Sugata and Sumantra Bose for inviting me to deliver the second Krishna Bose Memorial Lecture on the occasion of their mother, Krishna Ji's 91st birth anniversary. It is both befitting and to be expected that we should celebrate the memory of this extraordinary woman who exemplified the best traditions of public service and who is a role model for many of us. Krishna Bose's was the examined life, always balanced in joy and stoic in sorrow, to use her words, imbued with the best of human values, courage, empathy, compassion, and scholarship, rising above the narrow confines of party affiliations in politics and steadfast in its focus on the broader national interest. Her impressive memoir, An Outsider in Politics, which I have been reading, is a beautiful recounting of her fascinating life, for she was witness to, and often a player in, some epic and momentous events in independent India's history. Having known Krishna Bose since 2001, when I was spokesperson of the External Affairs Ministry, and she, as member of the Lok Sabha, was chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee for External Affairs, I consider it an honor and privilege to be in your midst today to speak on a topic that she would have considered most relevant and crucial for our time. The subject of soft power, I believe, would have appealed to her tremendously, as she was one who both instinctively and intellectually grasped the meaning of this concept with unerring precision, knowing its worth and capacity to influence outcomes in a manner that enables the greater composite good. As a lifelong Democrat who embraced pluralism and diversity, she also understood the effectiveness of soft power and that it is directly enhanced by the maturity and the vision of the democracies who wield it, as if they were two sides of the same coin. Power through human history has conventionally been defined as the strength of the militarily mighty and hegemonic, rather than the quiet, subtle magnetism of civilizational strength, cultural appeal, and the ability to influence outcomes through persuasion, attraction, and example, without coercion or intimidation. Hard power is the default, soft power is elusive and the Cinderella in the story. As humans, we have had to deal with legacies of war left behind by the exercise of raw power rather than those of peace. We see the desolation of battlefields and the sacrifice of the fallen, dreadful, despicable outcomes. The geopolitical default for most of us, therefore, has been to bleed in war rather than sweat in peace. At the same time, it is argued that hard power is the bedrock from which soft power draws its effectiveness, durability, and reach, and that without hard power, soft power has little sway, strength, or viability. The currency of hard power still dominates the world of international relations. Therefore, the use of military force and economic sanctions are go-to tools favored by the dominant global powers as a means to achieve desired ends. Whatever the validity of the last argument, it should still not take away from the need for countries such as ours to consciously develop and better deploy the portfolio of our soft power assets so that they substantively enhance the nation's stature in the world and in international public opinion, furthering our long-term strategic aims and interests. The dominance of hard power does not diminish the relevance and need to use non-military assets to realize national goals on the global stage. The old Hindi saying sums it all up. Jaha kaam aaye sui, kaha kare talwari. If a needle suffices, why use a sword? 3 decades ago, the Harvard University professor Joseph Nye defined soft power as the ability to obtain preferred outcomes through attraction rather than coercion. Its major characteristics, as Nye outlined, were culture, when it is pleasing to others, values, when they are attractive and consistently practiced, and policies, when they are seen as inclusive and legitimate, where you moved from exporting fear to inspiring optimism and hope. To cite an example, Mahatma Gandhi was the quintessential exponent of benign yet potent soft power through his moral efficacy and the use of the inclusive and legitimate values of nonviolence to set the agenda of Indian independence and to inspire future struggles against injustice and domination the world over. Soft power thus encapsulates the smart and strategically positioned use of communication, of visual media, and the spoken word by personalities, whether from politics, science, business, literature, sports, media, and the performing arts, who can shape the discourse concerning their country favorably. It is in essence discourse power, a means to become what in modern terminology is a standout influencer of opinion in favor of your country, organization, or group through the employing of persuasion and the force of attraction, and without the use of intimidation or coercion. That discourse power for India must be tied to the strength of governance, constitutional values, openness, sensitivity, and transparency in dealing with minorities and the disadvantaged, the protection of human rights, the attraction of entertainment, style, and fashion, the high standards of universities and education, tourism and heritage conservation, and environmental protection. The richness of India's soft power reserves is not to be disputed. We accept it as a given. We remember Mark Twain's words about the fascination that people abroad have had for India through the ages as a cradle of the human race, the mother of history, grandmother of legend, great-grandmother of tradition. This mystique is something that our leaders and foreign policy spokesmen have long sought to purvey, linking it to a modern context, to create images of India as a crucible of humanity, a repository of spiritual and wellness traditions and practice, a mosaic of many races and religions, identifying with universal values that speak of the world as one family. In fact, the very word yoga in Sanskrit means to join or to unite, so that India's projection of the benefits of yoga to the world also conveys that underlying message of a unity of body and soul in the human consciousness, seeking to fulfill in its own way the age-old quest for universal concord and harmony. Let us recall Sri Aurobindo, who in a radio message on 15th August 1947, which also happened to be his birthday, spoke of 5 dreams for India. One of those was for India to play a prominent part in ensuring a unification of the human world, read robust multilateralism, and developing that larger statesmanship of cultivating that international spirit and outlook where nationalism would have lost its militancy and a new spirit of oneness would take hold of the human race. This recalls Tagore's motto for Vishwabharati, Yatra Vishwam Bhavati Ekanidam, where the world makes a home in a single nest where interconnectedness replaces narrow nationalisms. Drawing inspiration from Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, our soft power is also meant to draw strength from the unity of this land and the gospel of harmony, as Netaji termed it, of all religions, of cultural synthesis, and that respect for freedom that is the song of the liberated, emancipated soul, which was the message of Swami Vivekananda. Tagore, another passionate votary of India's rich diversity and pluralism, saw India's strength as stemming from her capacity for civilizational dialogue, of creating the empires of the mind, and Advaita of humanity. His desire was the preservation of that moral force which he saw as giving quality to our civilization and making it worthy of being honored. However, soft power based on the rich civilizational ethos of India and Indian culture does not come cheaply, and it can work as an aggregator for the national interest only if it is accompanied by the evidence of real developmental progress on the ground, of the radical transformation of Indian lives for the better, of the elimination of poverty, squalor and destitution, illiteracy and the marginalization of women, especially in the rural areas, and ensuring interreligious harmony and improvements to infrastructure. We can ill afford to assume a self-serving or delusional stance on the soft power strengths we visualize ourselves as possessing in overflowing abundance when there is so much work to be done at home to improve lives. Even the excellent work we have done in vaccine diplomacy, which is a facet of soft power, is impacted adversely when the world sees the toll that the Delta variant of COVID-19 took on our population during the unutterably tragic days of May and June this year, because our health infrastructure and oxygen availability were overwhelmed by this tidal wave of the virus. Today, if we see our image in a giant reflecting pool filled with impressionist pictures of a glorious past, which is fast-forwarding India into a future imagined as even more glorious, we may be losing the plot. There is need for some introspection here. Soft power should have its roots in our present-day strengths and demonstrated achievement, embedded in inclusive societal values, economic growth, comprehensive national development, and democratic beliefs that are products of a millennial heritage. At the same time, it must be in tune with the times. It must speak to the 21st century in a voice that belongs to these times. At the risk of repeating myself, we could score much higher on the Global Soft Power Index if our universities were recognized as world-class institutions of learning, if our cities were clean and better planned, if gender-related violence diminished, if poverty declined rapidly, and population growth curtails itself, and we continue to foster diversity and pluralism as an article of national faith more than any religion. Years ago, a friend, the late Sumantra Ghoshal, spoke of what he called, for organizations and companies, the smell of the place. The smell of a place, he would say, is what you size up in 5 minutes of entering it, whether it is constrained by the dreary desert sands of habit, or whether it emphasizes aspiration and legitimate ambition, self-discipline, ease of doing business, modernity, efficient state capacity, a whiff of exhilaration, ample doses of mutual trust and energy. The smell of a place is determined by the context rather than the people who populate it. It is the context in which we function as a society and a country. It is the smell of the place that the outsider gauges when he enters the country and determines the extent of your attractiveness and soft power. There are those who claim that the recognition of Indian soft power globally is a recent phenomenon attributable entirely to efforts made by Indian policymakers over the last few years. Let us remember that poets and philosophers, theatre personalities and educators from abroad have been inspired by India's civilizational aura and ethos for centuries now. I remember the Hollywood star Gregory Peck reciting Tagore's beautiful poem, Unending Love, at the funeral of Audrey Hepburn. Those moving words, clad in the light of a pole star, piercing the darkness of time, you become an image of what is remembered forever. These words have a power of persuasion that resonates across time and space. 4 centuries, people have searched for their imagined India, the place of every arrival, as the English poet Kathleen Raine said, braving deserts and mountains and overcoming the most challenging obstacles. That was the drawing power of this wondrous land, this land of India, as Rimsky-Korsakov's famous aria, The Song of India, from the opera Sadko put it, and it is not a recent phenomenon. Let us also caution ourselves that the usage of terms like Greater India, meaning the cultural sphere of Indian influence in Asia, was consciously given up by India after independence. So, when one TV anchor recently structured an entirely vacuous discussion around this theme of Greater India, as he pointed to a map stretching from Afghanistan to Cambodia, one could not help but feel that such a lack of both emotional and intellectual quotient will never win us friends in our neighborhood. It is for those beyond our borders to willingly acknowledge the influence of India because they believe in such an influence as a benign legacy that permeates their lives without our having to be seen as seeking to impose it on them. The graceful retention of the name Singapore by its leaders after the British left was, as the journalist Sunando Datta Ray remarks, the best tribute Chinese Singapore could pay to India and her civilization. It came naturally as a measure of the goodwill and the repository of trust in a benign, non-threatening India built over centuries. The challenge facing countries who have soft power resources is how they can connect these to foreign policy goals such as trade promotion and development, health security, or even more sensitive issues like counterterrorism or border disputes. We speak of yoga and Bollywood as potent sources of our soft power. Are these changing the way target countries think about or interact with India? Does the WION TV channel possess the image and acceptance among audiences across the world that CNN or the BBC or even CGTN or Russian television have? This prompts us to look at how Korean soft power is now the talk of the town. Korean pop bands are crowd catchers across the globe. Their government has now begun to focus more on leveraging this soft power resource for showcasing foreign policy-related events. For instance, it arranged for a concert in Pyongyang for singers like Red Velvet and Baek Ji-young to perform at the first summit in 2018 between President Moon and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Clips from the concert had more than 3 million views on YouTube. The Korean language is being learnt across the world today. Fans in India are no exception. The Oxford English Dictionary recently noted that they were riding the crest of the Korean wave with 26 Korean words being added to the dictionary. The Hankook University of Foreign Studies and Big Hit Entertainment have jointly created a series of textbooks featuring the super hit pop band BTS for international fans to learn Korean. South Korean public diplomacy also uses Korean entertainment fan networks to deliver messages to engaged audiences. As a 2020 Carnegie Endowment report noted, creating opportunities for celebrities to use their own voices to speak for South Korean foreign policy priorities, such as inter-Korean détente, can be incredibly powerful. What is most interesting is how South Korea, a mid-sized power, unenviably surrounded by geopolitical titans like China, Russia, and Japan, with the United States completing the mix, has been able to use its soft power strengths to transcend neighborhood challenges and expand her influence on critical transnational issues. Despite the continued need for defense and deterrence capabilities that South Korea must not neglect because of the threats to her security, her soft power is enabling carve-outs that promote Korean interests in a number of transnational situations, with a growing premium being placed on South Korea's status as a robust democracy. Today, South Korea scores high in global soft power index rankings, which combine data in 6 areas: government, digital, culture, enterprise, engagement, and education, and polling data in 7: cuisine, tech products, friendliness, culture, luxury goods, foreign policy, and livability. Among countries in Asia, Japan tops the list, followed by South Korea, Singapore, and China. As the Carnegie report also concludes, South Korea provides a new model of what a 21st century Asian country can look like: an advanced economy mixed with an ancient civilization that is at once irrevocably democratic, technologically innovative, and culturally vibrant. there are cues for India here. Across the world, we have 38 Indian cultural centers established by the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, ICCR, that provides courses in various aspects of Indian culture, yoga, dance, music, and language, and develop the outreach in these fields to local audiences and communities. Their numbers are not commensurate with India's size and weight on the global stage. We need far more such institutions spread over various regions. In the United States, which remains a key global influencer and where discerning audiences in the capital, Washington, D.C., would avidly flock to lectures, seminars, readings, exhibitions, and performances relating to India at an institution that is a veritable house of Indian culture, we are yet to establish a cultural center, notwithstanding the experience of many other countries who have demonstrated the reach of their soft power through similar centers which have operated there for decades. Let me add that this is not for want of sincere effort and lack of good intentions on the part of our authorities, but somehow the establishment of the center has eluded us and remains one of the gaps in our cultural outreach in the United States. The Indian diaspora in that country has sought to fill the gap admirably, but nothing can replace a cultural institution in a world capital like Washington that bears the insignia of India. I would also like to dwell briefly on a topic that often receives top billing in India, this being the comparisons between India and China. We see China as a competitor, an adversary with which we share an uneasy and, where our contested borders are concerned, an armed coexistence. China's hard power, military, strategic, and economic, makes for a mix that overshadows the region today, eliciting fear, wariness, and cautionary responses to her outreach in the region. Despite this phenomenon, China scores higher on the global soft power index than India does. In the words of Kanti Bajpai, who has been based in Singapore over the last few years and is positioned from there to observe both India and China, classical India may stand head to head with classical China in the regard it garners, but contemporary India has been left a distance behind." Unquote. It is only if we recognize this that we can start to do something about it. Over the last few decades, China has consciously sought to soften its image abroad and receive respect using the appeal of Chinese art, architecture, cinema, literature, universities, and its behemoth economy. Several hundred Confucius institutes have been established also in the furtherance of this aim. Even if all these efforts may not have entirely yielded the desired goals of China's charm offensive because of the authoritarian nature of the Chinese state and its obsessive control of its citizenry, including gross violations of their human rights, the vast expenditures made on soft power diplomacy make for considerable impact. China's tourism industry is also far more well established and successful than India's, and the numbers of international tourists that China annually receives, around 63 million before the pandemic, far outnumber those who came to India, which was around 17 million annually, when last counted. Our state capacity in terms of infrastructure, investment promotion, and monetary resources is much behind China's in this field. We need to tie higher levels of national ambition and driven foreign policy leadership to investment in soft power development. India's strengths vis-à-vis China lie in her democratic credentials, her open society, and institutional freedoms, and constitutional values that stress respect for diversity, pluralism, and the protection of minorities. She must leverage these soft power assets better. Global opinion about India is built on the latter's capacity to uphold these values and also the workings of internal governance. We must demonstrate to the world that our democracy, to use the words of Amitav Ghosh, is stubbornly open to the flow of opinions, stubbornly resistant to the floodwaters that seek to grind all forms of life into uniform grains of sand, that it creates an archipelago of hope for the rest of the world in what we are seeing as trying times. There are some areas in which India needs to invest more in ensuring the effectiveness of her soft power. The creation of Brand India and India promotion has to be couched in a millennial vocabulary in tune with the 21st century. There has to be a focus on social media platforms, radio and television, films and documentary production, the scale and spectacle of cultural performances, in other words, a more robust, demonstrative deployment of India's soft power. For instance, as the largest democracy in the world, India has no international television channel that represents the country in the world. The BBC, to cite an example, is Britain's best global advocate in the cosmopolis that defines the borderless space we inhabit today. We need an Indian voice that speaks an international idiom which makes the country more intelligible to the world. There is a predilection among those who inhabit the bureaucracy to follow the established precedent because it is a safe harbor, and a risk aversion that we wear as default. As I have said before, big countries with real power aspirations must dare and do. A sophistication of presentation and the embrace of spectacle, the way the Chinese do, remember the 2008 Beijing Olympics, in our cultural outreach is a necessity. We must impress, appeal, and make the lasting statement. We also need many more hands on deck in our Foreign Office for public diplomacy maneuvers through the induction of PR professionals, as also augmented financial resources. Like Meiji-era Japan, today's India must scour the whole wide world for new ideas and best practices in communication and image projection. We need what some have called extraversion, that orientation towards the real world, the ability to be assertive, receptive, well-grounded, and always communicative. The capacity to adapt, innovate, and embrace change should be a constant. One of the areas for focus in developing our soft power is aid and development diplomacy. The Ministry of External Affairs has, since 1964, administered the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, or ITEC as it is popularly known, involving education and training of students and young professionals from the developing countries, especially from Africa, Latin America, South and Southeast Asia. This is a program that has built enormous goodwill for India over the years and won the country numerous friends and well-wishers. The expansion of such programs should be a strategic necessity together with the Development Partnership Initiative of the Ministry of External Affairs, as also the upgrading of our tertiary learning institutions to host more foreign students so that their numbers in our country increase. Here again, present numbers are no match for the students from abroad who flock to Chinese institutions of higher learning. Our neighborhood of South Asia is the primary focus of our foreign policy, and therefore a natural environment into which our soft power extends. As an exercise in soft power, despite the strategic difficulties involved, India's outreach into Afghanistan from 2001 till the events of August this year, when the Taliban regained their control over the country, can be cited as an instance of gaining great goodwill and winning hearts and minds. Development assistance from India totaled over $3 billion in the 2001 to 2021 period, and much more if calculated in purchasing power parity terms, and involved projects that focused on health, education, including vocational education for Afghan women, capacity development, and food security, among others. Additionally, India built roads and power transmission lines and dams. Indian small development projects benefiting those at the grassroots have extended into every province and district of Afghanistan. The parliament building in Kabul was also a gift from India. The impact on the Afghan people and on key influencers of public opinion was extremely positive and tremendous. This is an inspirational model of soft power at work that served foreign policy ends in an impactful manner. In the rest of South Asia, the picture is mixed. There is no doubt about the shared cultural universe of South Asia and the impact of Indian entertainment, music, dance, poetry, and cuisine in the region, spurred on by interactive historical experiences, shared ethnicities, linguistic and religious connectivity. But dissonances in political relationships, a low trust quotient, shortcomings in capacity, and even missteps in Indian diplomacy over the decades, deficiencies in infrastructure linkages, trade and commercial interaction, and the overall lack of regional integration make for an imperfectly imagined South Asia. Also, the very domination of India's geographical space is a factor that impinges on the mindsets of her smaller neighbors and erodes trust. It follows that Indian policymakers have to be constantly alert to these realities as they navigate the complex regional environment surrounding the country. The absence of a South Asian commons and the development of a shared South Asian consciousness is a direct offshoot also of the failure of SAARC, or the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which has fallen victim to the continuing deep-rooted complexities and the wide chasms that engulf India-Pakistan relations, as also the growing tendency to focus on regions beyond the subcontinent as far as foreign policy initiatives are concerned. For instance, as SAARC has receded into the shadows, India's Act East policy, which is oriented toward Southeast Asia and the ASEAN countries, or its Indo-Pacific focus, is more in the spotlight and has gained more traction. One need not object to either the Act East initiatives or those concerning the Indo-Pacific, but the shelving of the idea of South Asia, a region meant to be an integer, is unfortunate. What then is the power of soft power? It is true that powerful soft power draws its strength from the persuasive power of the creative talent, the civilizational ethos, the cultural matrix, the entertainment strengths, touristic attractions, rich cultural and historical heritage, the customs, the cuisine and the lifestyle, and natural beauty of a nation-state. Yet, it cannot fulfill its aims unless the mirror that we hold up to the source country concerned displays a picture of a dynamic, progressive, democratic, equitable society that is a responsible stakeholder in world politics and a contributor to the global public good. Soft power is also just one constituent of the matrix that makes up a comprehensive national power defined as the mix of resources and influence that a country possesses, where power is defined as the capacity of a state to direct or influence the behavior of other states, non-state actors, and the course of international events. As Australia's Lowy Institute defines it in their reputed Asian Power Index, resources like economic and military capability, resilience and future potential, combined with measures of influence like cultural and diplomatic, defense networks and economic relationships together make up the power of a state. Our policymakers, experts, and thinkers must work on a map for the future that plots all these points and charts routes and pathways to these destinations. Our soft power trajectory will blaze a far brighter trail if it is contextualized within the framework of these surrounding indices of power as the world sees them today. On a finishing note, we in India have to break free of our definitions of soft power as being centered solely in our civilizational ethos and cultural diversity. This has been our comfort zone, and we need to get beyond it. We must ask ourselves why we are not on the cutting edge of soft power like Korea with K-pop, China with TikTok, or Japan with anime. We must ask ourselves why we have no international brands like Uniqlo or an Emirates airline or an Al Jazeera, or why we do not have a Jack Ma with name recognition across markets, or why we consciously sought to stifle a brand like Air India, which was second only to Singapore Airlines as a world-recognized airline 50 years ago, and which we are now struggling to revive. Is it because we are too insular, prisoners of ideas that have outlived their shelf lives, comfortable with the precedent and afraid of risk, and preferring our giant echo chamber? Is it because we lack a third eye of sharp observation and a keen listening ear? Why do we have a convoluted struggle with modernity, understanding it only superficially, foreign ideas and open markets, unlike the 3 East Asian countries just mentioned? Why is India not the IT superpower that develops killer apps, as Neil Ferguson called it not long ago? Is it because we do not dream big and boldly enough, or turn our clocks forward so as to catch up for lost time? The answer literally blows in the wind. But let me switch modes now, as we have dwelt enough on these issues. Let me end with a small offering to Krishna Bose. It is a song that blends East and West on a comfortable dialogue between the two, as all soft power must ensure. The song is from Rabindranath Tagore, and the Bengali verses effortlessly merge into the words of Robert Burns, Purano she diner kotha and Old Lang Syne. Krishna ji, I hope, is listening from where I know she must be. Thank you, Sugata and Sumantra. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Namaskar.